Wir sollten anders über Fahrräder und Fahrradfahren reden. Our Cycling Language Matters, heißt sein Vortrag. Bitte schön, Ihre Bühne.
Ja, guten Morgen. Zum Ersten, es gibt kein schlechtes Wetter, nur schlechte Kleidung. So, das ist für die Nachmittag. Vielen Dank für die Einladung für diese Konferenz. Es freut mich sehr, einen Vortrag zum Thema Weiterdenken zu geben. Und diese zwei Bilder habe ich gemacht auf meinem Flug zum Dresden. Und das zeigt, dass es richtig wichtig ist, dass wir heute miteinander über die Zukunft der Mobilität reden. Gerne würde ich die ganze Lesung auf Deutsch machen, aber ich denke, es ist für mich besser und für dich, wenn ich auf Englisch weitermache. Warum? Das lässt ich mal gerne Professor Boroditsky erklären.
So, I'll be speaking to you using language, because I can. This is one of these magical abilities that we humans have. We can transmit really complicated thoughts to one another. Because of this ability, we humans are able to transmit our ideas across vast reaches of space and time. We're able to transmit knowledge across minds. Now, of course, there isn't just one language in the world. There are about 7,000 languages spoken around the world. And all the languages differ from one another in all kinds of ways. So if you ask German and Spanish speakers to, say, describe a bridge, like the one here. The bridge happens to be grammatically feminine in German, grammatically masculine in Spanish. German speakers are more likely to say bridges are beautiful, elegant, and stereotypically feminine words, whereas Spanish speakers will be more likely to say they're strong or long, these masculine words.
So this great TED lecture explains to us how language matters and how language defines how we describe and see reality. So if I ask you a question, what do you see in this picture? What would you say? Is it a duck? Or is it a rabbit? Or is it both? Both the duck and the rabbit are perfectly correct descriptions of the same reality. So using language to describe the reality is, first of all, necessary. We cannot talk about complex reality without having a language, and without that we cannot learn from each other. This is certainly true in domains that are very complex, such as urban mobility. So language to simplify the world is necessary. But using language to simplify reality is not only necessary, but always arbitrary. It's always debatable. You cannot say that the rabbit is more true than the duck, or the other way around. They're both true at the same time. So using language to simplify the world is necessary, but it's also always arbitrary. And perhaps most importantly today, what I want to talk about is how our language is not only necessary and arbitrary, but also performative. Our language does not simply mirror the world, but instead profoundly shapes it. The language we use to describe mobility problems and to talk about mobility solutions define how we are shaping our common future. We do not only use language on mobility to describe with each other here in this room the image of mobility outside, but actually the way that we talk about it here in this room, and we talk about it with the ministry, and we talk about it in our newspapers, defines how we shape our future together. So language is necessary, arbitrary, performative. Therefore, it is very important to become aware of the language that we speak with each other if we talk about cycling. And our professional language is often hiding behind the stage. It's something that we do not talk about that much. We take it for granted. And I propose today to put it front and center, to become aware, because if we become aware of it, it can become a very powerful tool to shape our future together. So this is an image that if I show in the Netherlands, everybody will be sleeping in 10 seconds. One of the most boring things that you can show a Dutch person, an intersection. But this is also at the same time sort of a cat video online. If you show things happening on Dutch infrastructure, you are guaranteed to go viral. And this image on Reddit also went viral. It is representative of the sustainable safety paradigm in the Netherlands, which was a very strong and important campaign to give cycling its mainstream position in mobility tech. It was a massive success. It re-established cycling as a mainstream transportation mode. It dramatically increased traffic safety, and we got a consistent countrywide infrastructure network dedicated for cyclists. So this is the reason why it's being copied all over the world. And this is an example from Germany, Darmstadt. And again, very good that finally cyclists get a mainstream place in design of our intersection. And I'm very proud to be an inspiration as the Dutch are in this case. Should be red, of course, not blue, but okay, it's a minor detail. But my point is that we might be transferring a fundamental flaw in our thinking with this logic. So this, although we applaud for it and it's good, at the same time, it might lead us into a very wrong urban mobility future. In very short, and I will explain this in more detail later, what we see here is the full and complete takeover of our public space by traffic engineering. So this once was public space, it's now completely taken over by traffic engineering. The systematic and standardized language developed mainly as a response to the arrival of the car to our cities. Before the car arrived in our cities, before 1920, this was not how we designed our public space. And it copies all kinds of implicit but important assumptions into the domain of cycling and pedestrians. So we need to be aware together what is actually the underlying language that we are transferring, in this case, to Darmstadt. Well, the starting point, as I already said, is traffic engineering. Traffic engineering was a response largely to a sudden appearance of large numbers of cars in our cities, and namely at first in the United States. And at that time it was very contested. It was not taken for granted that the car would take over the street, because the street was there already for millennia for all kinds of other purposes. It was public, it was a public good, used for public reasons. And there were many different frames that were competing when this happened. The frames around what is just? Is it just to have a car in the street? What is efficient? Should we have order or chaos? And a very important and dominant frame at that time was freedom, the freedom of driving. And that was a very strong coalition behind this last frame of freedom, the car coalition, Motordom, as Peter Norton calls it. And they called for a radical reconsideration of how public space should be designed to cater for the car. And in that language that started then, a very important element there is that mobility was always a human-machine hybrid. And if you look at this image, you can also see the specifics of this human-machine hybrid, because in this case, the human is only 15% of the entire hybrid. Right? It's 85% of it, at least, is technology. It's a system, it's a machine. And if you listen to some of the innovators around, it will not be far off in the future that this will be reduced to zero. Elon Musk wants us to believe in a future where the machine will take up 100% of this hybrid. The implications of this are that technology dominates in how we talk about things. The system dominates, the machine dominates. Mobility becomes something that we can optimize. It becomes a puzzle. Speed and flow become the most important elements. Mobility, the city and streets become puzzles that we can solve, that we can optimize, that somehow have an ideal way of design. Engineers took over the role of urban designers, and the human could be further and further simplified. And that fitted really well, because then you can model them. So what we did there is we simplified the human into what is called the Homo economicus, the selfish, rational, cold decision maker that maximizes his or her own utility. It's a very egoistic part of who we all are. Mobility in this is seen as a derived demand. This means that utility of this individual is derived from going from A to B, to be in Dresden or to be in Amsterdam, and everything in between is a disutility, is a negative thing, something that you need to reduce, ideally, to zero. So being on the way is expressed as friction, as impedance, as a generalized cost, where time, money, stress, and discomfort are to be minimized, ideally to zero. And now I hope that you can already see, this is what's being sold to us in every commercial break on television. That in the future, we will have mobility that has zero discomfort, that brings us to the other place with almost zero disutility. We can either go very fast with the Hyperloop, we can work or relax, we can go on Facebook or Instagram in a self-driving car. We have seamless mobility, mobility as a service. So we can drink finally a cup of coffee in Paris and be at home at the end of the day.
Genius and how flexible the human mind is. Human minds have invented not one cognitive universe, but 7,000 languages spoken around the world. And we can create many more. Languages, of course, are living things that we can hone and change to suit our needs. I've told you about how speakers of different languages think differently, but of course that's not about how people elsewhere think. It's about how you think. It's how the language that you speak shapes the way that you think. And that gives you the opportunity to ask, why do I think the way that I do? How could I think differently? And also, what thoughts do I wish to create?
So it's early in the morning, I'm very relaxed, and I'm focused at the same time. I ride my bike to work in Amsterdam. And I didn't have my first coffee yet, I still have to get my coffee. So I'm still relaxed, but I'm focused. So I enter an intersection, and at the intersection, something remarkable happens. When I enter the intersection, I am aware of all the other users in the intersection. I already see where they are, I know their speed, I know their direction, I know what kind of bike they have. If they have a red bike, I know that they're tourists. And I know how many cars there are. If they have a blue number plate, they are taxis. I take all of this into account. I know the traffic light cycle. And I use all this information to very slowly adjust my steering wheel a bit, to just stop pedaling a bit, and go through this space without any friction. And I leave the theater at the other end of the intersection to go to the next, before I had my coffee. But if you look at the same intersection, you start seeing that the logic does not fit this behavior. Even in Amsterdam, the logic of intersection fits not the behavior of a swarm of starlings, but the flock of geese. It's designed for large vehicles that want to go from one point to the next with clear rules, with as little energy loss as possible, and without any friction. Because you can imagine what happens if the first geese suddenly decides to go left. Mayhem. Chaos. That cannot work. So we designed our intersections and our infrastructure, even where cyclists dominate, according to this logic that really fits. I hope that you see what the geese is standing for here. It fits really well with the car. So this limit becomes painfully clear at these places. And I would say that this look from the windscreen, this look from the geese to the swarm of birds, explains a lot of the frustration and negativity around the discussion we see, for instance, around the behavior of cyclists and pedestrians. Because just imagine what this goose is thinking when he sees this swarm. How can this possibly function? What an absolute chaos. Why do they not have clear rules like us? Where is their discipline? So dangerous, the field has to be covered in dead bodies. Why do they not wear helmets? I call this conceptual laziness, and I think we can go towards more conceptual leniency and develop a new language if we try to understand what happens in a swarm of birds itself. So whoever has stand in the evening and watched a swarm of starlings, it's amazing, right? It's magic. So whoever wondered, so how did they do it? Or even more important question, maybe, why? Why do they do it? Can this help us to develop a new language? So the point of a swarm is that general rules do not work. You cannot explain a swarm behavior by general rules. Averages are meaningless. There's no equilibrium, there's no overall logic, there's no leader, there's no clear or shared goal. It's a game, a dance. And there are 3 rules that every bird here applies. One is be as close as possible to the middle of the swarm. Don't collide with your neighbors and follow the same direction and speed as 6 of your other neighbors. And by responding to these rules, the equilibrium is continuously shifting, right? If one bird goes closer to the middle moves. And this is called in complexity theory emergence, and we do this all the time. Humans use emergence all the time. You used it already for 2 days when you decide how loud do you talk at the coffee machine. And you respond to the sound around you, but by responding you change the sound level. You will do it later when you have to decide, well, how many times do you clap? So I hope that you give applause later. Think about how many times do you clap? When do you stop? And you stopping, what does that mean for your neighbors? So that's emergence. And the funny thing is that cycling, and especially here Dutch cycling, sitting upright on a Dutch bike with coaster brakes, allows for emergence. It allows people to engage with each other in a much different way than we do when we are in cars. Why? Because here, not 85% is technology, 85% is human. Only 15% is technology. And there's two main characteristics that are at play here. One, the human is open for communication with all his or her senses and the body. They can send and receive information. So you can offer and agree on certain rules together. And we have direct and precise control. Remember, I entered the intersection and I could immediately brake or steer a bit. So this interaction allows for emergence. And emergence is, again, by responding to this other person, I also change the rules of the rest of the game. Welcome to human land. For some, this first looks like chaos, but if you keep on looking, you will start observing rules, unwritten rules. Look at all the subtle interactions. Where the machine is no longer optimized, but reduced, people can thrive. They meet their own goals and together also higher system goals. It functions, not ideally, but better than before. Continuous, subtle exchanges of offers and agreements, as Thomas Schelling calls this, and some of these people are aggressive. Yeah, they are egoistic. But just as often, people are courteous. They are kind to each other. They show that they care. So this goes way beyond the Homo economicus. What we see here is emergence. No forced discipline, but strongly coordinated interactive variations. Hundreds of these before you had your first coffee. That has to do something with who we are. And that brings me to my final point, the why of mobility. So this is the how, emergence. Why does this matter? Well, think about it. Why do birds, starlings, why do they swarm? There are many explanations. A recent one I heard was mobbing. So they form a larger group to scare away large predators. Maybe cyclists do that as well, to scare away cars. Safety by numbers. But they also do it partly because it's a bonding experience. So they dance together. They dance as a bonding experience every day. So what if we consider that public space is not an engineering puzzle, but it's a place of bonding, where society takes shape, where interaction should not be designed out, but should be a necessary form of friction that forms society. One of the few places we are forced out of our bubble to meet the proverbial other. This is called the potential exposure to diversity. Just to say, nobody gets hurt in this video. It looks like it, but it's all fine. What you see here is that many different types of people do these offers and agreements together. It's a very diverse social environment with newcomers, famous people, politicians, bums, students, newcomers, kids, elderly, they're all there. And between them, they have to engage. This is called the potential exposure to diversity. And game theory suggests that playing such a negotiation game over and over leads to a strengthening of our social bonds. If you then start looking in the literature, that's what we then do as academics, in the sociological literature, this potential exposure to diversity is connected to these kinds of variables: feeling of membership, sense of influence, fulfillment of needs, shared emotional connections, collective efficiency, citizen participation, sense of community, sense of place, sense of belonging, less prejudice, and mutual trust. So what if we could spend our mobility budget to reach these goals instead of having the most efficient intersection, right? That would be awesome. Wow. What a language. So be aware that behind every policy idea, behind every narrative, and behind every conversation you had here, there is a definition of a problem and a solution. And under that is an underlying language. And I ask you to become aware of it, because it's a powerful weapon, but not if we take it for granted. Use it as a powerful weapon, in your advantage, but always be aware of your own limitations. All your own languages are also wrong, but that doesn't matter. What matters is if they're useful or not. So if we are aware, we can train ourselves in the art of using metaphors and language. Do not pose your language on somebody else, but show that by using different languages, you start seeing different things. Then we can start developing mobility languages that can inspire much more sweeping urban mobility futures that also people outside of this room might be able to rally behind. We need a mobility language in which a human is not a calculating, egoistic homo economicus, but a rich and complex citizen, in which interaction is not a conflict, but friction through which society thrives, and in which travel time is not a quantity to be minimized, but a quality to be maximized. Thank you.
Also das war ein ganz wunderbarer, hoffnungsmachender Vortrag. Wir sollen tanzen und dadurch erreichen wir all die wunderbaren Dinge und Ziele, von denen wir ja alle träumen, tolerante Gesellschaft und all das. Es klingt, ehrlich gesagt, für mich so ein bisschen zu schön, um wahr zu sein. Okay. Und deswegen brauche ich, und ich glaube vielleicht auch Sie, so ein paar noch Hilfestellungen, wie wir das erreichen können. Gerade wenn es darum geht, den Kampf um Verkehrsräume vielleicht ist das Wort Kampf schon das Falsche. Wahrscheinlich ist das Wort Kampf schon das Falsche. Okay. Also wenn es darum geht, Autofahrern Platz wegzunehmen. Und gibt es da eine Idee, wie ich das kommuniziere, ohne jemanden, wie ich es schön kommuniziere?
Yeah, well, I'm a social scientist, so I'm not into the solution part, but I can put my head on it.
What a pity!
No, but I'm also a father of two, and I'm also an activist. So this part is that, right? So I would say that if you want that, we should stop talking indeed about fights. We should stop even talking about the words that we even use in this conference, pedestrians. I'm not a pedestrian, I'm a human. I do not want to be reduced into a pedestrian. That's a logic that started in the 20s. Before that, people were just walking. So can we just talk about humans? That's one. And that's the point here. I think we should talk about different goals. If you say, I'm going to take away your parking spot, of course people are saying, well, wait a minute, that was mine, you're taking away something. But if you say, who here wants autonomous children? Dutch children are the happiest children in the world. Why is that? Partly because they're autonomous. They can go to school by themselves at the age of 8. Who doesn't want that? I bet that if you start talking about that, so we have been trapped, I think, in a language that reduces what we want. We all want here a better society. We do not only want people on bikes. I don't believe that. I had a bicycle shop before, and back then I really wanted people on bikes. But if you think about society and the role that 600 or 800 of you can play in Germany, it's not about getting people out of the car and on the bike. That's only a means. We want a different society. So why do we not talk about that? Why don't we talk about our children, our public spaces? And And I'm not saying, I'm not naive. I don't think that then suddenly all problems are gone if we change our language. But I hope that we start seeing that we are limiting our potential here by sticking to a language that is imposed on us.
Können wir da was von den Niederlanden lernen? Ist bei Ihnen die Sprache schon in dem Sinne oder das Wording weiterentwickelt und hat das was mit der Kultur des Radfahrens zu tun, die da anders gelebt wird als bei uns? Okay.
I think also in the Netherlands, as I said, the Netherlands is a great example of how we can put cycling in a car-based system. The Netherlands is, of course, it's great to bike there, but it's also okay to ride your car there. So it has placed the bicycle within the logic of cars. Great, good. Everybody should do that. But now is the next phase. So now we are phasing out the car again. It was a huge mistake. It was a bad pilot, living lab, what you want to call it. Two or three generations. Now we want to move back, especially in cities. And there I see that we are, in the Netherlands, we have painted ourselves in the corner of the room without looking where the exit is. So we have done great things, but we are really now struggling with how do we redesign our streets. The separated bicycle infrastructure is great in the car logic, but not so great if so many people are on the bike path with all kinds of different bikes that they are blocking each other. There's all kinds of stress. We also have this discussion about what to do with the kick scooters and the new micromobility things. And you see that the discussion there is really limited because we don't see that we are talking about that discussion in the same language as, okay, what is faster, what is more seamless, how can we make apps? So we are not better in that sense now.
Oh, okay.
Short answer.
Well, no, it's okay. Aber gibt's, also, Sprache ist aus Ihrer Sicht der Schlüssel zum Erfolg, richtig? Gibt es ein Beispiel von einer Gesellschaft, die da möglicherweise schon weiter ist, weiterentwickelt als dann die Niederlande und die das besser machen?
Ja, vielleicht weiß einer im Publikum ein
Beispiel? Oh, ich setze mal die Brille auf vielleicht.
Ich glaube schon. Ich habe ein Beispiel.
Oh, gut. Okay.
Der Stadt Mechelen in Belgien.
Ja.
Der nennt sich selber Kinderstadt. Awesome.
Okay.
Kinderstadt. Who's against that? Right? So now the city and the streets are being redesigned to allow children to play more on the streets. And as a result, car parking has to go. But you can't be against that. Because if you're against that, you're against children that play. So that I really found that a remarkable finding. And I think that the Belgians are really maybe the best in the art of using language.
Okay.
So it's also another one from Belgium is living streets, which also are human streets, where they say, well, it's, and then everybody's like, yeah, of course, living streets. We want streets on which we can live. Well, that has certain consequences, but yeah, well, okay. So instead of talking about let's fight about traffic space, they say no, let's change the debate and let's call it something else, and then solutions are closer. So I wouldn't say that. I don't want to give the impression that we just have to change language and everything will be fine. But currently it is limiting the effects that we can have. I think that's.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.